Hello, welcome to Nature Source Care. This is Dr. Funda Gulman, and today I will be talking to you about simple natural techniques to help with stress and anxiety and insomnia. Before we get started, please note that the information presented here is meant for education only and should not be considered medical advice. For individual medical advice, or if you have symptoms that are worsening or quite severe, it would be best to seek the advice of a qualified healthcare professional. Also, the information presented here can be incorporated into existing treatment plans, for example, medication or counseling, but it is not meant to replace it. So the first technique, deep belly breathing. It sounds simple, but it's actually pretty profound and works quite quickly. So the idea here is that when you slow down your breathing, you actually slow down your thoughts. So especially those runaway thoughts, when people get anxious, they just sort of tend to take us over. And just taking a few deep breaths deep into the belly starts to slow down the nervous system so that we can get clear again. Okay. When people get anxious, they tend to breathe in the upper portion of their lungs. And this technique also, by using your hands, rather than just doing some sort of breathing technique, free form or meditation, it's nice because when you use your hands, it helps you externalize and physicalize your attention. So again, it helps you kind of get out of your mind a bit and focus externally to help break that cycle of runaway thoughts. So the technique is that you sit or lie down on the floor comfortably with a straight spine and close your eyes. Then you place one hand on your heart and the other hand on the lower belly, like the picture indicates. At first, what you want to do is just notice your breath, like where is it in your body, and the qualities of it. So is it fast? Is it slow? Is it rough? Is it smooth? Is it shallow? Is it deep? Like just notice where the breath is so you know where your starting point is. And then after checking in with yourself this way, what you want to do is slowly invite the breath. Don't force it, but slowly invite the breath to go deeper into the body so that your lower hand, the one that's on your lower belly, begins to move. And with each subsequent breath, you want to draw air in slowly and deeply into the lower belly so that this hand keeps moving. And you can even make a game out of it, like how deeply can you move your hand? Or excuse me, how deeply can you breathe and move this bottom hand that's on your lower belly? And you can practice this for a minute to 5 minutes, once or twice a day. And this is simple enough. You can actually even teach kids to do it. At some point in my career, I worked in a psychiatric hospital, and I used to work with a lot of kids and adolescents, in addition to adults. And they often, when kids were kind of starting to get anxious and restless, they would often medicate them. And before they got to that stage of needing medication, I would often try to just sit and breathe with them and even say to them, hey, let's just you and I breathe together, take a couple deep breaths. And I would teach them this. And we would just sit there for a minute or two and we just do a few deep breaths and they would usually get better pretty quickly and kind of turn that whole pattern around for them. So again, really simple, good for just about anybody. And the thing too is that even if you're out in public, not necessarily just sort of doing this on your own in the privacy of your home, but maybe you're in a meeting and there's some stressful thing going on in the meeting. Even if you don't use both hands, if you put one hand on your lower belly, you can still do this deep breathing exercise, and just remind yourself, okay, I'm starting to get anxious here. Maybe the meeting is very stressful for whatever reason. I'm just going to sit here and keep breathing deeply into my belly and people won't even know that you're doing it. So you can use this technique pretty much anywhere, which is nice. So the next technique we're going to talk about, actually a couple of techniques. I started grouping these together in sort of like themes. So the next theme is gentle movement. And the reason why gentle movement is important rather than vigorous movement or exercise, sometimes vigorous movement can actually rev somebody up. And especially if there's like a performance aspect to it, they may actually be increasing the adrenal response or increasing the stress hormones in the body rather than shifting down so that they're in a more calm, relaxed state, shifting more into the parasympathetic or calmer nervous state. So, just a couple of examples of gentle movement that tend to work pretty well for a lot of people is one, a gentle, mindful walk in nature. Um, Again, exercise in general tends to help improve mood, regardless of whether it's depression or anxiety or postpartum or acute or chronic. Physically moving in a gentle way tends to help improve mood. And as I mentioned, intense competitive exercise can sometimes do the opposite. So, you need to experiment a little bit to see what works best for you. But generally, if you're really revved up, it's best to do a gentle, mindful walk. Exercising outdoors has also shown to have a more relaxing effect than being indoors, assuming that it's actually safe to go outside. So, like they looked at, what was it, ADHD kids, and they showed that these kids actually respond better if they're exercising outdoors rather than indoors. And also, they tend to do better if they're out in nature. So, not just like on a blacktop, but if it's possible to get closer to nature, maybe a beach or maybe a park or something like that, where there's some grass or trees around. Somehow, that also has a added benefit. And it doesn't have to be long. Even walking 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day is really helpful. So, another form of gentle movement that can be very helpful is gentle moderate yoga. And there are all kinds of classes are available for kids, seniors, chair yoga, indoors, outdoors. So, there's really, yoga for just about everybody in every situation. And you can take classes in person or online. There are a lot of places you can go for classes online. One example is glow.com. They have a bunch of different teachers. You can choose what level class you want, like a beginner class, intermediate, advanced. You can choose how many minutes you practice from 5 minutes to 2 hours. You can choose the style of yoga you want from Kundalini to Ashtanga to just, Hatha. And what's nice about most yoga classes is that they incorporate gentle movement with breathing. So it's almost like combining the first technique I mentioned, the deep belly breathing, with gentle movement. And especially if the verbal cues of the teacher are quite good, they'll help you get into more of a mindful place, and which will help you sort of feel released from some of the thoughts that might be, causing anxiety and stress for you. And then typically there's also meditation involved. So, a lot of different stress helping and anxiety helping and insomnia helping techniques actually sort of rolled up into one. So that's why that's very helpful. And this idea is just a gentle, mindful walk in nature. These are photos I take or I've taken while doing this myself. This is a daily practice. It has been for a very long time. And this is something that I personally find very helpful with just sort of managing the stress of my day and my life. And it really helps that I do this daily, even when I'm not feeling particularly stressed out. Just having this as a daily routine, just the way some people brush their teeth or wash their face. I'm pretty steady and consistent with this, so it's a really nice go-to. And you can see from the pictures here, I walk almost every day, whether it's snowing or raining. Sometimes the weather, I'm the only one out there, just me and the geese. But also having that camera there while I'm walking helps me focus on whatever's out there, whether it's the snow on the tree or a close up of a flower or an animal that showed up or like a bird's nest that dropped from a tree. And again, it takes me out of a state where my mind might be kind of rolling around, really contemplating something, and I just need a break from those thoughts to just sort of settle down into the body, let the nervous system kind of calm down, and even kind of get inspired. Sometimes you see a really beautiful color, sometimes you just see, one line that's like, oh wow, that's really nice composition. Or like some animal sort of swoops in front of you and it catches your attention. So again, this is the mindful walking piece, and the photography actually leads me into the next set of techniques. So going from the photography idea and sort of broadening it out, the creative arts in general are actually really good for stress and anxiety, and thereby also helping with insomnia. For example, playing gentle, soothing music. This actually increases GABA, which is an inhibitory neurotransmitter that already exists in the brain. Um, and it helps to just calm down the mind and calm down the nervous system. So, you might even make a playlist for yourself, sort of a chill out playlist that helps you shift your frame of being. But really, any sort of creative endeavor can help with stress and anxiety. So, singing, painting, dancing, writing, the creative arts, the creative process, it actually increases another neurotransmitter, serotonin, which is actually a focus of actually a lot of medications that help with anxiety and depression. So you can naturally increase serotonin in the brain by being creative, and whatever floats your boat, whatever really gets you moving and um, excited is a good way to go. Um, and if you use the creative process, so maybe you can, maybe you're going to paint a picture just to paint a picture, some bird or flower or something, and that in and of itself is fantastic. But you can also use these creative tools, singing, dancing, painting, writing, to express how you're feeling. So drawing out emotions rather than stuffing them down. So by using these creative means to draw out and express your emotions, it can be cathartic and releasing rather than suppressing, um, which is usually a better way to go. The other thing about doing something creative, a lot of people get hung up with, oh, I'm not an artist, or oh, I'm not a creative person, or oh, I can't draw. Um, and just remind yourself, this is really just about helping you feel better and get into a better place for yourself, and is not about getting into some sort of art show. It's not about the output, or the target is really about you feeling better, not about what comes out, on the paper, or in the music, or in the dance. It's really just for you. So try to keep that in mind. So, get out those crayons, or get out your kids' crayons and just start scribbling on a napkin. It doesn't have to, you don't have to have really super fancy art supplies to just get started. So another sort of theme that's helpful when dealing with stress and anxiety and insomnia is to stay close to nature. I mentioned, walking in nature, or, gentle movement. You can just be outside. Maybe, for example, sit on the beach or dig in the garden. And there's just something very healing about being close to nature, being on some grass, or being next to some trees, or just watching the waves go in and out. Nature has a deeply calming ability. It's almost like it can absorb, our individual human stress to some degree. I already mentioned that idea about ADHD kids. They tend to do better when they're out in nature versus on a playground. But like if you're sitting on a beach, just even listening to the rhythm of the ocean, in and out, and paying attention to that gentle rhythm, it's almost like listening to a heartbeat or something. It's very primal, and it kind of resets your own internal rhythm, because when we get anxious, our internal rhythm is very like staccato, like and very fast, like. And if you want to calm that down, if you sort of connect with a slower, deeper rhythm, it can help you sort of reestablish your own internal rhythms. So that's part of how that works. And it's also nice because when you do something like sit on the beach, it may seem like a simple thing, you're really connecting with something greater than yourself. I mean, it's a huge ocean, and the sky and the clouds and all of that, the rhythms of all of that, the sun rising and setting and the waves in and out and high and low, everything's being conducted and orchestrated by something much higher than ourselves. And so sometimes just sitting in that and reminding ourselves of that can help us sort of get out of our own small microcosm and connect to something larger. Yeah. So, and then, digging in the garden, actually putting your hands in the earth is very grounding. And it also, again, when you use your hands, helps you externalize things. It gives you something to focus on besides, worrisome thoughts that might be sort of, that sometimes it feels like they're hijacking you. Um, and also, if you are planting like a little tree or a little seed or something like that, or watering the grass, this sort of, again, it's sort of a creative endeavor, and there's something very nurturing about it. And when we're in a creative, nurturing space, again, it starts to affect your mind in a positive way where we become more open and sort of in flow. Um, and as I mentioned, the hands in the dirt, literally, is very grounding. And you don't have to have some big, garden. You don't have to have any garden at all. Even if you have like one little potted plant in your apartment, if you live in a big city, that can still, if you truly connect with it and just don't keep walking by it with and sort of like end up ignoring it, um, that can be very helpful. So these are some other pictures I've taken. Again, just to sort of emphasize the concept here, any corner of nature can really help you refocus your thoughts, like keep you from sort of this downward cycle spiral that tends to happen and actually lift you out of that and maybe even project you onto a better trajectory. So, like, we have here pictures from a forest in France and the beach in Connecticut. That little tulip on the bottom there, that's actually my backyard. That was the first tulip one spring. So, you don't have to go, to super far destinations to be connected. And even this little glass vase with a few little plants and some deep shadows, those are actually weeds from across the street from my house. And you can't tell because it's not in color, but they're little tiny purple flowers on the top. And I thought, oh, those are kind of cute. And they were mowing the grass. And I was like, oh, before they cut everything down, let me grab a handful of these because I liked them. I thought they were cute, and then I took them home and put them in the vase with some water. And here, like what somebody was trying to mow and cut down, I thought was interesting to look at and brought some color and interest to my living space. So again, big or small, near or far, um, nature is around somewhere usually. So another theme here is hydrotherapy, kind of like what I mentioned with, actually putting your hands on the earth, in the dirt, and how the earth element itself is literally very grounding. Water is similar in its effects, or it can be. So do two different techniques in this category. Swimming generally is helpful. Um, it's less sort of, again, depends on how you do it, but generally, it's just a very soothing um, practice for most people. And then there's also the concept of neutral bath. So let's go through each one here. In case you're not familiar with the term, hydrotherapy means the therapeutic use of water. And I mentioned the grounding effect of being in water. When you combine gentle rhythmic movement, so again, this kind of gets back to one of the first slides where I was talking about gentle movement overall. When you do the gentle movement in water, you kind of double up the calming effects that this can have for you. So again, it just tends to be a very nice practice. It's also nice if you tend to have any like joint pain, because some people have a hard time walking. It's just too much. So a lot of people can do like aqua walking or just, hang on to the side and kick a little bit or, move your arms. That's all helpful. You just want to be careful with any kind of hydrotherapy, um, making sure that the water is clean so that doesn't cause a problem. Being careful of slipping and accidents. If you have any open wounds or recent surgery, you shouldn't really be soaking in water because that can kind of open up the wound again. Public facilities, again, that gets back to the idea of cleanliness um, and the possibility of contagious disease, not just like you may be catching something from a public facility, but you don't want to have a contagious disease and go into a public facility and potentially share that with other people. So it works both ways. The concept of a neutral bath, a lot of people aren't familiar with this so much. Usually when people take a bath and they're trying to relax, they talk about, oh yeah, I want to take a really hot bath and just sort of melt into it. And there is something to heat tends to relax muscles, but when we're talking about like truly deep anxiety on the nervous system level, a neutral bath can actually be better. And the reason for that is that the neutral bath is very close to body temperature, typically, 96 to 102 degrees Fahrenheit. It feels neutral to the touch. What happens is that floating in the water tends to be grounding, and when you don't have, again, something super stimulating, such as really hot water, because the nervous system has to take in that sensory information and process it. Really hot water can be stimulating for the nervous system. So again, this is something you might want to try out um, because it tends to be a gentle, neutral, balancing therapy, rather, especially for somebody who's already overstimulated. Um, And it does actually, I put on the slide too, it does sort of invoke this yogic idea of pratyahara. That's a term for limiting sensory impressions so that you can focus on internal impressions, your internal experience. So that's part of what happens in yoga is that, you're sort of drawing your attention away from the outward world, all the things that tend to affect us. It's usually something in the outer world that's making us upset or causing us concern. And so when we draw our energy in and focus inward, we can connect with a deeper core that's not as how do we say, it's not as it's more steady, more solid. Like we connect with our own steadiness, our own solidness, basically. And that's what we want. If we can cultivate that through things like yoga and these sorts of practices, the stronger we develop that, the more easy it is to turn away from things that cause us stress or not get so stressed out, even if the same things happen over and over again. If we develop this sort of muscle of um, connecting with ourselves and staying solid with ourselves, then things will kind of happen and we might be like, oh, well, that's not so fun, but we won't get so riled up, wrapped up, thrown off course, derailed. And that's really what these techniques are about. So the neutral bath doesn't have to take too long, maybe 5 minutes, up to about 15 minutes. Again, the water is very neutral in temperature. Um, and you can just do that once a day. If you don't have a bath, a lot of people don't. You could even do like a foot bath. Again, neutral water for just a few minutes, and soaking your feet in neutral water tends to also have this calming effect on the nervous system. So a couple of photos to demonstrate the hydrotherapy ideas, or at least the safety ideas with hydrotherapy. The photo on the left is the oldest swimming pool in Iceland, but you can see from the steam that this is definitely not a neutral bath. It's a warm bath because it's natural water coming from the earth, and because there's so many volcanoes underneath Iceland's surface, the water's pretty hot. And actually, you have to be careful because if you get too close to the vents where the water is coming from, you can burn yourself. So that's an example of, be careful before you dive in. And then the picture on the right is a lovely waterfall from Hawaii. But, I guess these guys didn't get the memo that the fresh water in Hawaii, actually, you can get leishmaniasis from it. So you can get a contagious disease from any of the fresh water um, in Hawaii. So if you go, take your pictures, but you probably don't want to dive in. So safety, safety. So this next concept is pretty big. Meditation, and I'm also combining visualization here that can sort of be a form of meditation. And a lot of people they probably hear the word a lot these days, but they may not know what it is, or sometimes people make it more complicated than it needs to be. Um, and sometimes it's hard to sit and try to sort of create calm on your own, if you're feeling particularly restless. So having a really good meditation prompt, an effective meditation prompt can be helpful. So this is just one that you might use. Um, it tends to help when people are really feeling thrown off course by external events. So you want to sit or lie down in a comfortable position with your spine straight, and then close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths. Then you start to imagine that you are actually one of these big ancient oak trees that's been living for decades, like really tall, really wide, that's solid to its core, and you feel completely connected and supported by Mother Earth, right, who is grand and wise, majestic. Okay, so really feel yourself in this position of being this great tree that's been living on the earth for a long time. And then all of a sudden a storm starts to roll in. You start to see it. And you start to feel the top branches of the tree. They're starting to move. They're starting to sway with the winds. But despite the winds that are coming in, you stay connected to that deeply grounded core. Right? I mean, you've been through storms before, right? You've been living on the planet as this large tree for many, many, many years. So the winds are swaying and you stay connected and you keep taking deep breaths. Deep breaths. And then finally the winds start to die down and drift away. And the sun comes back out. And the skies are clear again. Right, so take 3 deep breaths. And when you feel ready, open your eyes. So again, feel free to take this, use it, maybe adjust it a little bit, and in whichever way that serves you best. But here's just one example of combining meditation with a visualization that can be very helpful during times of stress, especially the visualization. Works for a lot of people. Some people have a hard time visualizing, but it actually, again, gives you a positive point of focus rather than just the thoughts that are kind of spinning through your mind. This is another simple technique. It might seem too simple, but you'd be surprised how much it can change things. So it's sort of a combination of mindfulness and gratitude. Um, so if you start your day, wake up, and one of the first things you do is to list 5 things that you're grateful for. Okay, and if you're used to waking up and not feeling that great, this may be like a huge shift, but that's part of the point. Is to again actively cultivate new thought processes. And then you can also add in or do separately At the end of each day, list 3 gifts that you received that day, big or small. You never quite know what a gift is for somebody. I remember another time that I was working in the psychiatric hospital and, spending time with patients, and I don't know, a group of us were sitting around chatting. I think we were sort of, talking, laughing a little bit about whatever was on the front page of the news, maybe some celebrity, I don't remember exactly, but for me, it was not a particularly, I don't know, different or significant day, or, it was just kind of another day for me. But we were wrapping up the shift, and what I typically did with the patients I worked with before they all went to bed, we gathered up in a circle for announcements, and then I would go around and ask each one, what was the best gift you received today? Because it's pretty tough. I mean, they have, you know, issues with anxiety, depression, other sort of things, mentally, emotionally. That's why they're there. But the environment's, not always the greatest. Most people don't want to go and spend, day after day in a hospital with limited exposure to go out and that sort of thing. So again, is another technique to maybe redirect their mind in a positive way. And the one time when we were sort of sitting around chit chatting that to me wasn't particularly noteworthy. When we went around the circle, there was one woman who said, "The greatest gift I got today was that I laughed without being high." And just, within myself, I just sort of like stopped and I thought, wow, one, first thought was, wow, how much do I take for granted? But I was so grateful that she shared that because it really put into perspective how many gifts. I mean, I was when it was my turn, I don't even remember what I said, but yeah, I felt like I was like, oh, okay, what was a gift today? And the thing was, the truth of it was I had so many gifts that I couldn't even count them all, when she offered that perspective. So she really taught me a lot that day. I'm very grateful to her. And that's the thing about this practice is that you can do it on your own, but it may also be very powerful to engage others in this practice. So ask other people, what was the biggest gift you got today? And, you'd be helping them potentially gain a larger perspective and support them, in their own well-being. So another technique to consider. Another thing definitely to include in this whole conversation is to decrease stimulants. This probably is not a popular slide, but it needs to be said. A lot of people are walking around, getting through their day, drinking a lot of caffeine. Um, it's a very popular beverage all over the world, but it has known effects to cause jitteriness, anxiety, insomnia, and it negatively affects mood. Um, there's a range of ability and being able to process caffeine. Um, but people really just aren't aware of how much of an effect it has on their nervous system because everybody's sitting around drinking it all day long, to a large extent. So, you might experiment with this on your own. If you're drinking a lot of caffeine, though, you don't want to just go cold turkey. There can be adverse effects of that, such as headaches. That's a very typical one. So instead of just going cold turkey, you might switch to half regular or half decaf. Or another way to go about it is like if you're drinking 4 cups of coffee a day, to decrease it to 3 cups a day, and then over time 2 and 1, and maybe get off of it completely if possible. Um, Again, this one I think is really underestimated because caffeine is so popular and so prevalent, but it's amazing how much effect it has on us. And then another very popular substance, alcohol, other recreational drugs. I mean, while they're socially acceptable and legal, they also are known to have adverse effects on the nervous system, mood, and cognitive function. So, again, another thing to consider if you're revved up and anxious and have like a lot of insomnia, it's hard to get a handle on that. You might want to reconsider how much caffeine and alcohol and other substances you might be taking into your system. Um, and if it's, pretty heavy duty, you want to get professional help to help you um, level out your use, um, because it can be dangerous to just detox on your own. But again, people know it uh, already. This is not, something, earth-shattering here, but again, because people are, taking so much, I think they forget that, something as simple as like decreasing how much coffee you drink a day can really have a improvement, or you can really see a big improvement in your mood and anxiety levels. So supportive nutrition, here's another category. So the first idea is you don't want to skip meals or fluids. So people, when they get stressed and like they typically feel like they have to get a lot done, they'll be like, oh, I don't even have time to eat. So they'll start skipping meals. That's not a great idea because if you skip meals, it's going to affect your blood sugar. And when the blood sugar goes up and down, mood goes up and down, and cognitive function goes up and down. So even if you eat something light, um, skipping meals is not the best idea. The other thing is that skipping fluids, so some people don't drink just plain water, enough plain water, and they're dehydrated. And mild levels of dehydration can negatively affect mood and cognitive function. So you want to make sure you're, just generally eating enough, with a decent, regular frequency, um, and getting enough water so that you're not dehydrated. Another supportive nutrition idea is that you want to make sure you're getting enough protein and fiber in your diet. When you eat a lot of sugar or carbohydrates or processed food without enough protein and fiber, that processed food, sugary, heavy carbohydrate food, that gets converted into sugar in your body very quickly, because the protein and fiber are there to balance it. So the sugar levels soar and then they drop really quickly. And people, it really affects mood and cognitive function. People get brain fog, concentration problems. It's a big deal actually. So you want to make sure, you know what your protein foods are, like meat, fish, eggs, dairy, nuts, seeds, beans, lentils. And make sure that each time you eat, there's a decent amount of protein on your plate. Um, even with snacks. And then also make sure there's enough fiber. So the fiber comes from whole foods. So whole fruits and vegetables, whole grains, that's where the fiber comes from. So again, if you're eating a lot of carbs and eating a lot of processed foods, your sugar levels are going to be all over the place and your mood is going to be all over the place. And it's going to be hard to get a handle on how you feel internally and how you're thinking and moving through the world. So this is a different concept, or might be a new concept for quite a few people. Ayurveda is a traditional Indian medicine. It's over 5,000 years old. And in that system, they think about people's symptoms and diseases as primarily being three types. Again, this might sound very simple, but it's actually very profound. So the three types are too much wind or vata, too much fire or pitta, and too much earth or kapha. Fear, anxiety, insomnia, those three states are all categorized as a situation in which there's too much wind or vata. So there's too much wind in the mind and the body. So if we just think about the wind in general, you get like a pretty, good sense of what this means. So when people have too much vata or too much wind, their symptoms tend to be cold and rough and dry and erratic, like the wind, right? Like fall, like this picture. I mean, all this is like the last leaf. It's looking very dry. It's sort of torn on the edges. It's definitely rough for wear. It's time to recycle this, and come back in springtime. So the way to decrease the wind in somebody to help with symptoms, windy symptoms such as fear, anxiety, insomnia, is to avoid those qualities. So if you're cold, being windy, you want to avoid cold. If you're, rough or your symptoms are rough or intermittent, you don't want to be inconsistent with your habits. You kind of get the idea. So if you're dry, if your system is dry, like your skin is dry, or your eyes are dry, or your colon is dry, resulting in constipation, you don't want to eat a lot of more dry food because it's just going to make you drier, you know. And especially you don't want to eat like cold food when it's cold outside. You get the idea. So more creates more. And to balance cold, rough, dry, and erratic qualities of wind, you want warm, smooth, moist, and consistent. That's what you want to go for. So how do we translate this into food choices? So what are examples of cold, rough, dry food? Chips, crackers, cookies, pasta, dried fruit, beans, lentils, corn, raw fruits and vegetables, cold food. Okay. So if you have windy symptoms such as fear, anxiety, insomnia, typically it's interesting. Typically, people who are very windy love to eat this kind of stuff. Like they like the crunch or something. I don't know exactly what it is, but they love chips and crackers and cookies and pasta. Plus, like windy people tend to always be moving like the wind, like they have a hard time settling down. They have a lot of restless energy. And so they may not like settle down long enough to actually cook a meal. So they're sort of like always on the run. And so they just sort of grab whatever's easy, and around them. And that tends to be cold, dry food, which makes them windier. So you want to think about like, okay, how do I shift this? So if you're somebody who eats salad in the middle of winter, so cold, dry, rough food in winter, you might want to take all those nice vegetables and throw them in a soup pot, warm up those vegetables, cook them, and add some liquid to balance out the dryness and the coldness of the wind in your body and your mind. Okay. And then the other thing, which kind of goes along with the idea on the previous slide, but from a different perspective, is you want to eat grounded, balanced meals on a regular schedule. So, like 3 square meals a day for most people works pretty well. Um, but you don't want to skip meals because you're basically eating air and wind. It's going to throw your mind and cognitive function off. So that's another way of thinking it is like, well, if you eat air, you're going to get windy and you're going to develop windy symptoms like fear, anxiety, or insomnia. If you look at it from the Western perspective, it's like, oh, if I skip a meal, my blood sugar is going to drop and then I'm going to get hungry and then I'm going to, snack on whatever chips and cookies and just, boost up my blood sugar for maybe half an hour and it's going to go crashing again. And my mind and anxiety are going to follow suit. So, different perspective, but actually a very similar message. So here's a body therapy that helps pretty well for a lot of people. And this is warm oil massage for the hands and the feet. And the reason why this works pretty well is that when we do massage on the hands and the feet, there are a lot of acupressure points there. And so those acupressure points go back to balance the nervous system. And the oil itself, warm oil, tends to be very soothing for the body and the mind. It's actually like warm oil, you can see, like going back to the previous slide about Ayurveda and the concept of too much wind or vata, is that if there's too much wind or vata, so cold and dry, the opposite of that is warm and wet. So warm oil is a way to balance too much wind or vata. So the technique is very simple. Again, you just take a few tablespoons of sunflower oil or olive oil, gently warm it up, and then you slowly massage your hands and your feet with the oil and allow a few minutes for the oil to soak into the skin. Like maybe your feet you cover with socks. You just want to be careful if you have any open or infected skin areas, recent surgery. You don't want to disturb that if it's healing. If you don't have the ability to feel temperature very well, you don't want to maybe do this because you might burn yourself. Um, Advanced diabetes or circulation issues, this may not be appropriate. And then again, if you're massaging your feet with oil, you don't want to end up slipping, so be careful there. But just spend a few minutes, especially like at the end of the day or when you're not feeling that great, with a little bit of warm oil massage. Give yourself a little bit of self-care. Um, and again, it's a simple technique, but it can be very effective. So the concept being introduced on this slide is about the importance of keeping a routine when, circumstances around you seem particularly out of control. The nervous system really likes to have things in a consistent pattern. It's just less taxing on the nervous system. The less that your nervous system has to take in sensory impressions and then make a decision about what to do about them, the more you can think about it as like the more efficient a nervous system is and the less taxed it is. Um, so when we keep a routine, day to day, week to week, even season to season, when the body and the mind have some level of, expectancy of what's coming, the nervous system can relax. If things are always changing, if we're back and forth, if one day is never the same as the next, if we never eat at the same time, or we never sleep at the same time, or wake up at the same time, actually we don't think about it as stress, but actually the body gets very stressed out by it because again, you have to constantly make decisions as opposed to like make one decision and then just sort of keep in the habit of it. Um, so establishing routine, if you don't have one, is actually very important. And it's also important because, we can't control a lot, almost anything that is in our surroundings, but we can create some kind of structure within the habits that we keep every day. So the concept on this slide is about creating a supportive environment. And again, a lot of people don't realize the contribution that our environment has on our nervous system, particularly because we're so technology heavy in the way most of us live our lives. But a couple of things that you can do to work with this is that if you check the devices that you work on, like your computers, phones, or whatever, you may actually find that they have a night light or a yellow light function on them. And why is this important? Well, most devices like computers and TVs and stuff, they actually emit a blue light from them. And the blue light is stimulating to the nervous system. Like they actually found that, I think there was a big study in Japan where a lot of kids were found to actually develop seizures because they were watching a lot of TV and getting a lot of this blue light. Um, so if you look on your devices, you may find that there's a night light, yellow light feature. And if you switch to that, especially in the night, you'll start to support the natural circadian rhythm in your brain to help you with, especially like sleep, but anxiety and stress, because we're sparing your nervous system more sensory impressions. Yeah. So I'm not sure how it works on Apple, but on Windows, if you go to display settings, at least on my computer, it's like the first thing you see is like night light, yellow light, which actually was funny enough. Like it actually took me a while to find, but I'm glad I did. So it's just a simple thing you can do to switch that. So at night, switch especially to a yellow light or night light to help your nervous system out. And then beyond your devices, just extra light bulbs that are on at night, especially because again, we're not really designed, we're our deep biology is designed to follow the rhythms of nature. And so when we have a lot of lights on in the middle of the night, it disturbs the circadian rhythm that keeps us functioning well and our nervous systems well. So once the sun goes down, you might look around and see, do I really need so many light bulbs on? Can I get away with maybe just one or two? And then use candles. If that's possible, because the candles, there's a lot less light to look at, but it's gentler on the eyes and the brain, and that's what you're trying to achieve. You can also like set your lights. It also helps to set your lights for certain times. So instead of just, some people to relax, they start watching like their computer or TV. and then they just like turn it, the lights are on, the computer's on, and they don't realize that the light coming from those sources is actually keeping them up even longer. So, if you've changed your computer to night light, yellow light, and then you put on a timer the light bulbs in the room to go off at a reasonable time, usually before 10 o'clock is best, just to, again, support a healthy circadian rhythm. Usually you want to set the lights to go off 30 to 60 minutes before you actually want to fall asleep. Um, that's actually very, very helpful um, with getting you into good, regular sleeping habits. And again, just taking the load off your nervous system in terms of all the stuff it has to process. Again, this is like another thing where, we're using computers so much all day, and sometimes into the night that we just don't realize the effect it's having on us. So, a simple thing, but actually pretty profound. Yeah, so consider this one as well. So there you go. Hopefully a lot of different techniques to consider, different perspectives, but I found through my clinical practice that these are ones that I turn to usually first and offer to patients, and they've been very helpful to a lot of people, kids, adolescents, and adults. So hopefully you find them useful as well. Thank you for your time and take care.